The deed, the morning sun, stretched across Walter Hayes's farm like honey poured slow from a jar. He stood on his porch with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, watching dust rise in the distance. At first he thought it was just the wind kicking up along the county road. But the rumbling sound that followed told him different. 3 yellow excavators rolled onto his property like mechanical beasts from another world. Their metal tracks tore fresh wounds into the earth his grandfather had worked 70 years before. Walter set down his coffee cup. His hands started to shake, not from fear but from something deeper, the kind of anger that comes when someone threatens the ground where your family is buried. He walked down the porch steps slowly, feeling every one of his 62 years in his knees. The excavators came to a stop near his south pasture, their engines idling with a sound like distant thunder. Men in hard hats climbed down from the cabs, carrying clipboards and wearing expressions that said they belonged here more than he did. Walter approached them across his own land, past the oak tree where his daughter had her first swing, past the spot where his wife used to plant tomatoes every spring. The foreman saw him coming and held up one hand like a traffic cop. "Morning, sir," the foreman said. His voice was friendly enough, but his eyes were already looking past Walter, measuring the land for whatever they planned to do with it. "We're with Midwest Pipeline Company. We'll be working on your property for the next few weeks." Walter stopped walking. He could feel his heart beating in his chest like a hammer on an anvil. "My property," he said quietly. "You're on my property?" "Yes, sir." The foreman pulled a folded document from his back pocket. "We have a legal easement. Right away for the new pipeline. Should have received notice in the mail a few weeks back." Walter took the paper. His hands were steady now, steadied by disbelief. The document was full of words that seemed designed to confuse, whereas and heretofore and pursuant to. But the meaning was clear enough. Someone, somewhere in some office he'd never seen, had decided that a pipeline was more important than his farm. "I never got any notice," Walter said. He looked up from the paper to meet the foreman's eyes. "And I never sold any easement." The foreman's expression shifted just slightly. A crack appeared in his professional certainty. "Well, sir, according to our records, the easement was purchased from the property owner of record." "That's you, isn't it, Walter Hayes?" "It is." "Then I'm afraid there must be some confusion." "But we have our permits. We have our authorization. We're legally allowed to be here." Walter looked past the foreman to the excavators sitting silent on his land. He looked at the other workers standing in a loose group, checking their phones and waiting for the conversation to end so they could get on with their day. He looked at the furrows the excavator tracks had already made in the soil. "Get off my property," Walter said. The words came out calm and clear, like water from a deep well. The foreman blinked. He glanced down at his clipboard as if it might tell him what to do next. "Sir, I understand you're upset, but—" "Get off my property," Walter said again. "Right now." The foreman's jaw tightened. "Sir, we have a legal right to be here. If you interfere with our work, you'll be in violation of the easement agreement. There could be consequences." Walter folded the document and handed it back. "I don't know what agreement you're talking about. But I know my own land, and I know when someone's lying to me." For a long moment, nobody moved. The excavators sat silent. The workers watched. A red-tailed hawk circled overhead, riding the warm air currents, unconcerned with human disputes over dirt and paper. Then the foreman pulled out his phone. "I'm calling our legal department," he said. "They'll straighten this out." Walter waited while the foreman made his call. He waited while the man explained the situation in clipped professional phrases. He waited while the voice on the other end of the phone apparently asked questions. And he watched the foreman's face change as the conversation continued. The foreman's certainty crumbled like old mortar. His expression shifted from irritation to confusion to something that looked almost like embarrassment. He ended the call and stood there for a moment, staring at nothing. "Sir," the foreman said finally, "there's been a mistake." Walter waited. "A significant mistake," the foreman continued. He rubbed the back of his neck with one hand. "Our company purchased an easement for this pipeline route, but it appears the property description in our records is incorrect. The easement we purchased is for a different parcel, not this one." Walter felt something loosen in his chest. "So you're on the wrong land?" "Yes, sir, we are. I apologize for the intrusion." The foreman looked genuinely uncomfortable now. "We'll clear out immediately, and someone from our office will be in touch to discuss compensation for the damage to your pasture." Walter nodded slowly. He didn't trust himself to speak yet, The foreman turned to his crew and started giving orders. The workers climbed back into their excavators. Engines roared to life. Slowly, carefully, the machines began to reverse, backing away from Walter's south pasture like children caught somewhere they weren't supposed to be. Walter stood and watched them go. He watched until they were back on the county road. He watched until the dust settled and the rumbling faded, and the only sound was the wind moving through the wheat and the hawk calling somewhere overhead. Then he walked back to his porch. His coffee was cold, but he drank it anyway. It tasted like victory, bitter and sweet at the same time. That evening, Walter sat at his kitchen table with a phone book and a notepad. He called his lawyer, a man named Jim Porter, who'd handled his wife's estate and knew more about property law than seemed possible for one human brain to hold. He told Jim the whole story. Jim listened without interrupting. When Walter finished, Jim was quiet for a moment. "Walter," Jim said finally, "you did the right thing, but listen to me. Get a survey done, get your property lines marked clear, and get copies of your deed recorded with the county. Make sure everyone knows exactly where your land starts and stops." "I will," Walter promised. "Good, because next time you might not be so lucky. Next time they might have the right paperwork." Walter thanked him and hung up. He sat there in his kitchen as the sun went down, painting the walls orange and gold. He thought about his grandfather, who'd bought this land when it was cheap and worked it when times were hard. He thought about his daughter, who'd moved to the city but still called every Sunday. He thought about all the people who'd stood on this ground and called it home. Some things, Walter decided, were worth protecting. Even when the world showed up with excavators and documents and confident voices. Especially then, he got up and walked outside. The stars were coming out, brilliant and cold and impossibly distant. Walter stood on his land and breathed the evening air and felt something like peace settle over him. Tomorrow he'd call the surveyor. Tomorrow he'd get his deed in order. Tomorrow he'd make sure this never happened again. But tonight, his land was his, and that was enough.